the Sounds True Podcast Network.
I didn't know what I was seeing. I had never seen anything like that before. And once I couldn't get it to go away, I did what I think most people would do, which is like I'm asking in my head, like, what the heck am I seeing? Like, what is that? And when I asked that question, I heard this little boy's voice, just clear as day. And he said, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back together with my physical body."
Welcome, friends, to this special Sounds True series on spirituality and the neurodivergent mind. We're here with Suzy Miller. Suzy Miller is an integration specialist, a visionary educator in the field of multidimensional communication. As the founder of the awesomeism practitioner process, Suzy has spent 25 years helping non-speakers and neurodivergent individuals unlock new ways of integrating their bodies and connecting with the world. Suzy, here by way of introduction and as a way for our listeners to get to know you a little bit, take us back to what I'm going to call the origin story, if you will, of how you started working with people on the spectrum. We're going back now to 1999. Tell us a little bit about your career at that time and then this interaction that changed everything for you.
Yeah. So in 1999, I was a pediatric speech language pathologist in the state of Maine. I had a thriving private practice, and I was introduced to a new child through his daycare center. And I went to visit him for the first time. And as I went to visit him, he's marching around in his daycare center saying, "It's the millennium, it's 1999. And I, at the time, was looking through my speech pathology eyes. I had not worked with children diagnosed with autism, with any, hadn't worked with children diagnosed with autism up to that point. And part of the reason for that is I graduated with my master's degree in 1986. And during that time, the incidence of autism was like 1 in 10,000. There was no need for an education in that field because there weren't that many kids. So when I met him on that day in the daycare center, he was marching around, as I said, and I thought he was just a strange little kid, curious and trying to figure out about him. He walked right up to me at the daycare center, made direct eye contact, which I now know is not common. And he just said a single word. He said, "Master." And when he said "master," I had some movement of energy from head to toe kind of cascade right down through my body. And I remember immediately thinking, who's the master here? What's going on? I took him to the back of the daycare center to work with him. Had no idea what to do with him because I had no education in autism. So I sat down against the door and I was just letting him get to know me. He's still walking around. It's the millennium. It's 1999. And all of a sudden, as he's walking around, Tami, I saw basically this body of light that was floating above his physical body. So it would be like a little cutout, bright white light, same size, same shape as his physical body, little 4-year-old body, but just floating above him. And the only connection point between that light body and his physical human body was a little tail that came off of the foot of the light body, dropped right down into his head, and kind of just dipped in and out of his heart space. And I kept rubbing my eyes, trying to get that to go away. I didn't know what I was seeing. I had never seen anything like that before. And once I couldn't get it to go away, I did what I think most people would do, which is like I'm asking in my head, like, what the heck am I seeing? Like, what is that? And when I asked that question, I heard this little boy's voice, just clear as day. And he said, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back together with my physical body." And I had no idea what he meant. And I did not know why he thought I could do that. But I also knew in that moment that my life had completely changed. And so he basically took me through a year-long process where he would come to me telepathically. He would come to me in dreams. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I would see him sitting on the end of my bed. And he would just tell me, "This is what you're going to do next." And I would just follow his lead and do what he told me to do next. And at the end of that year, was actually on my birthday, I did a little bit of I'll say a distance energy session on his behalf. And the next day I went to physically see him. And when I went to see him the next day, he was coherently, verbally communicating. He had verbal communication beforehand, but it was repetitive, like it's the millennium, it's 1999, nothing functional. So when I saw him, when I opened the door and he was standing at the top of the stairs, and he literally said, "Hi, Susie," just like I was visiting anybody. And I was on my knees because everything that he had asked me to do over that year, plus maybe that energy session, had helped him verbally communicate where that wasn't possible a year ago.
Can you give me a sense of what you did to generate the integration between the light body and his physical body? What did he ask you to do?
He asked me to do all kinds of different things. Like, I was still pretending to be a speech language pathologist at the time. So I would bring my cards and my vocabulary cards and all this other stuff, trying to figure out what he understood and what he knew. And like one day he said, "Bring color. I need you to bring color." And I was like, okay. My children were at a Waldorf school at that time. So I had these big silks that were different colors. So I just stuck them in my bag and I brought them with me. What I found out is that if I was flipping vocabulary cards and showing Riley different cards and asking him to point to different, animals or whatever, he couldn't do it very consistently. But then I would hear him telepathically say, put that red scarf over us. So I would put it over both of us like we were in a tent. And he'd say, "Now turn the cards." So I would turn the cards and he would name every single one of them or point to the one that I was asking him for. So then I would go back and say, "Okay, why can you do it?" And he said, "Well, because color is a consciousness and I can use that consciousness to kind of categorize or to deepen my relationship with those cards. Red's also a very grounding color. So you're helping me be more present in my body while we're utilizing that color." So it's like, okay, great. So he would, at one point, he asked me to bring tuning forks. And I didn't have any tuning forks. So I went out and bought just a big, just a grouping of them. I had no idea what to do with them or how to use them. And he would say, "One's for my soul," or "One's for like the light body part of me, one's for my physical body." And so I would go, okay. And I would just go through all of them and I would hit different tones. And he said, telepathically, he'd say, "That one." And I'd go, okay, put that one aside. And then now one for my body, my physical body. And we would go through the same process. And he'd say, "Now do them together." So I would put them together. And then there's these two sounds. That was fine. But then he said, now do that with your mouth. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so, but years later, I did it in that moment, but years later, mastered this ability to warble between these two tones. And so at the time in 99, I'd never done that before. So, but something happened and I was able to move those two tones back and forth. And he would say, yeah, that's it. That's it. So it was, there were times when I would say to him, can I tell your mother, what we're doing? Like, does she understand this about you too? No, we're not going to tell her yet. She won't understand quite yet. But by the time we get to the end, she'll understand. So it literally was, it could be anything like that. Or he would come like in a dream and we would be doing some kind of multidimensional energy work, and then the next day he would be a little bit more settled. There were times when I'd come in and physically be with him and he'd say, hold my feet. And as I would hold his feet, I would see the light body come a little bit more into the physical body or interface more. So it was haphazard, honestly. It was just kind of whatever he was telling me to do, I was doing. I think the important thing that I learned, Tami, was that especially what followed, every one of these kids knows what they need from that higher vantage point, and it's all different. It's all unique to that integration process.
Those examples are helpful. Thank you. They help make it real for me. The question I have, and I know you've been featured and your work's been featured as part of the popular podcast, the Telepathy Tapes. Mm-hmm. You say that you heard Riley in his voice telepathically. How did you know, and I don't mean this as a rude question, but I just need to ask, how did you know you weren't just making up his voice inside your head telling you to do certain things?
Believe me, I did think I was making it up at first. To me, the proof was just in the pudding. I mean, I'm a very curious person by nature. And if at any time something that he was telling me to do didn't have some kind of immediate impact, in all honesty, I think I would have given up a long time ago. But the very fact that each one of these was able to be reflected back to me or able to be shown to be positive or supportive of this process, that's what kept me going. Because otherwise, I think I would have thought I was making it up for sure.
Do you have any kind of litmus test that you use in your communication with people who are on the spectrum to know if this is telepathic communication versus imaginary communication?
So, yes, my speech pathology nature, when I first started this experience, quite honestly, I didn't want to and still don't want to be communicating for anybody. I mean, I think that's a slippery slope in all honesty, because, you just don't know. I mean, what information is being shared? Is that being shared clearly? Is it being filtered through somebody's lens? So what I would do is I would get the information and then I would say to Riley, I would verbally say, Riley, this is what I heard. This is what it sounds like you're asking me to do, or this is what is that accurate? And I would just say it out loud to him, and I would have a board. And this was long before there was spell to communicate and things like that. I just made a board and one said yes, one said no, and there were times when he said, no, that's not accurate. That's not. And I would go, okay, clarify it for me so I could get a little bit more coherent around that. And I think it is a skill too, Tami. So I think that just like if I was learning somebody else's language, and, I might say it back to them and go, no, you didn't get that. Those aren't the right words, or that's not the right thing. So to me, I think it was really important to be able to, just ask him. And as he got more fluent in his verbal communication, then I would ask him that way too. So
now, Susie, you're the first person that I've ever met who describes themselves as an integration specialist. Maybe this is a career of the future. It seems like it's something a lot of us need. And I want to understand more from your perspective how you understand integration. And specifically, what I mean, you've given this example of the light body and the physical body. But I wonder, sometimes I have this sense of an emotional body and a mental body and the physical body, and they don't all seem to be well knit together. So I would like to know from your perspective what you're integrating when you work with people.
So that's such a good question. And first, let me say that when I've asked the kids this question about their integration, like, what are we integrating? Literally, what are we integrating? And so to me, the light body first is consciousness itself. It's like the consciousness of that soul, if you will, what they're bringing here. I think we're all, to one degree or another, disconnected from who we truly are, right? I think that's why we have so many seekers out there. So, as I understand it, the light body is that information field of, you might say, our totality, or our what we've come to offer, express, the soul's directive, you might say. And then we have the physical body, which is, to me, is the biology. What the kids said is that the only reason that we're feel disconnected from our biology and the light body is because of those mental and emotional body fields. So the mental and the emotional body are all over the place, quite frankly. We've been conditioned to certain thought patterns. We've been conditioned to be seekers, to be looking for something outside of ourselves. We've been definitely conditioned to certain emotional patterns. Like if we came into a family who dealt with everything through anger, right? Then it's likely that as we mature, we deal with everything through anger until we start to integrate that, right? To neutralize that. So when I'm looking at integration, I'm looking at a variety of different things. First and foremost, I'm looking at what's the information at the soul level that wants to know itself as interfaced with the biology, right? Or with the physiology. And in order to do that, very often we have to start clearing out some of the family lineage, those patterns of mental, emotional energy. We need to clear that out so that those who are seeking integration can have the awareness that physical body and the essence and the soul, they're the same. They just don't know it, right? And the reason they don't know it is because we've been conditioned with so much other information that has us feeling separate. So that's kind of what I'm looking at when we're looking at integration.
I'm curious how the work that you've done with so many children on the spectrum has translated into your own journey of integration.
Oh, they're one and the same. I'm a firm believer, and the kids have said this to me since I started interacting with them is I can't offer anything that I haven't learned myself. It's like they would never, like, I listen to people who will teach different things that they've heard about or whatever. And I'm not saying I don't wish I could be that person some days, because some of the integration, my own integration, has been extremely challenging, quite frankly. I mean, I think part of the reason I had access to the kids in the first place was my own early experience. My own early in childhood imprinting had me up and out of my body quite a bit. And so it was kind of like I found them, you might say, out there. And then as they're helping me learn how to integrate them or support their integration, I'm going, wow, that applies to me too. And so there's been a lot of work done and continues to be a lot of work done on integration in my own personal life, because I know I can only support somebody else to the degree that I'm integrated myself. And I love these questions, Tami, because it's when you're very first starting to do this kind of work, you're just doing it. You're just doing what you're told to do, you might say. And it's very hard to explain it to people, to consciously have language for it and explain it. But over the years, it's become easier and easier to explain, mainly because I've had to do that integration work myself. I've done a lot of that through one of my favorite processes is the presence process by Michael Brown. I have been through that probably 10 times now, at least. Now it's more of just a way of being.
Could you briefly introduce people to it who are new to it, and as a way of being, what do you do when you find I'm clearly out of sync internally?
Yeah.
Things are rough and not all harmonized.
Right. So first, how do we know when things are rough and not harmonized? Usually it's because we're triggered, right? We have some
We're in
kind of
pain. We're
in pain, we're in discomfort, we have some kind of emotional triggering. In the presence process by Michael Brown, briefly stated, he will just say, when you have that trigger, that is an opportunity for you to integrate something that has not yet been loved or integrated within yourself. Most of that unintegrated information has gotten imprinted in the first 7 years of your life. Not always, sometimes the first 14 or 21 years, but the bulk of that is in that first 7 years. So a lot of times when we get triggered, we don't even know why we're triggered. We think it's in that moment. He suggests that it's never in that moment. It's always something that hasn't been loved from the past. So the trigger comes up. You basically dismiss the messenger because, we don't yell at the mailman for bringing us bills, right? We just take the bill and deal with it, right? So same thing here. That trigger comes up, dismiss the messenger. And once we've dismissed that messenger, what am I feeling? What am I noticing? What does this remind me of? I personally like the question, how old is the one who's feeling this? So, so again, not assuming one, that I'm bad or I'm wrong because I'm triggered, but assuming that there is an opportunity there, that some part of me wants to be loved that didn't get loved before. And when I ask that question and I hear, how old's the one that's triggered? And I hear you're 3 or you're 6. You know, I think the mother in me immediately can go, oh, you're 3. It's like you're not a 63-year-old woman. You're a 3-year-old right now. It's like, what do you need? Can I support you? Can I love you? Then the moment you go back to that mothering, I'm going to mother that child within me. Very often at that point, that alone is enough to have that 3-year-old feel safe in that moment. She's allowed to feel whatever she needs to feel. And I think the more we can allow that for ourselves, the more we naturally integrate some of these things that are extremely triggering. Yeah.
You've been listening to Insights at the Edge. Have you ever watched honeybees flying in and out of the hive, gathering nectar, working together with coordinated activity and purpose? It's like witnessing one mind in action. In their new book, beloved beekeepers Michelle Cassandra Johnson and Amy Bertain share reflections on what honeybees can teach us about relying on each other, interconnection, and living in harmony. It's called The Wisdom of the Hive, available anywhere books are sold. And now, back to Insights at the Edge. Okay, back in 2008, you wrote a book called Awesomeism, A New Way of Understanding Autism. And I'm going to, once again, just be very upfront with you. I noticed just seeing the title, I felt a little triggered, if you will. I was like, oh, come on. Really, Susie? I mean, how do we balance something I really want to talk to you about, which are the special gifts and the sort of new emerging capacities that we see embodied in people on the spectrum, this awesomeness and awesomeism, at the same time, the emotional outbursts, the challenges, the difficulties, the clearly not awesomeness of being on the spectrum. And how do you put that all together for yourself, that balance, if you will, of perspective?
Right. Well, first, they put it together for me, so I am a very curious person and I ask a lot of questions, just like you're asking right now. So I want to understand as well. So it's not, none of this gets taken at face value. And also, so Tami, like right at the very beginning, I literally said to these kids, listen, don't show me anything that we can't do something about, because if you do, it'll just drive me crazy. And so, we're establishing a relationship here. So if it comes to me telepathically or any other way, just make sure it's true. Just make sure it's real. Because if not, I'll just be beating my head up against the wall and that's not going to feel good. And I'll stop. I knew I would. I just know that part of myself. So in answering your question, it's like when I ask the kids, okay, you're clearly telepathic. You're all telepathic. I've never met any one of them that wasn't telepathic. I also had to look at the fact that I'm telepathic. So maybe it's just that I can connect with everybody because that's my skill set. So, but basically what the kids would say is there's a frequency of our souls and there's a frequency of the human bodies. The frequency of the soul might be up there at quite a clip. That consciousness might be vast, you might say. And that consciousness might be capable of all kinds of cities. It's like capable of all kinds of clairs, you might say.
And when you say cities and clairs, maybe just explain that for people who are unfamiliar with those terms.
So the city is a Sanskrit term that is basically gifts of higher consciousness, you might say. And the clairs, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, those abilities, again, same thing, just different words. And as far as I can tell, I mean, every single person comes endowed with these gifts. Again, because we've been conditioned out of them, we don't know we have them until we know we have them, right? So the kids are coming in, and what they just kept saying, one kid after another, and then the collective consciousness of all the kids, when they started talking to me, they just kept saying, we're functioning in this field of like oneness. We're functioning at this level of all of these capacities, right? Our human bodies are layered because of our lineages with all of this conditioning, right? Layer upon layer, generation upon generation. And they would say they were here to help shift that dynamic. They're here to have the soul's essence interface more fully with uh, um, the human imprinted essence or body. So to me, the only reason why we have a diagnosis of autism is we got one frequency here, in the higher realms, in the soul level, we have another frequency in the physical realms, and they're a mismatch. And that's where you get dysregulation in the body. That's where you get challenges in communication. And we see this neurologically even. So neurologically, if you've got a wide open right hemisphere, right? And it's not so much that the left hemisphere is not functioning. It's just that you've got so much more information trying to funnel through it that you get dysregulation in the body. The cool thing about this is that when I start introducing some of these concepts to parents and I start helping them work through some of their imprinting, their lineage challenges, when we go through processes similar to the presence process or other techniques, what we notice is all of a sudden the kids start calming down, their bodies start regulating, right? And so I was asking, I'm going, okay, yes, you have all of these capacities, but we also still have these bodies that are dysregulated, that are acting out, sometimes are aggressive, sometimes don't even know there is a body, right? Don't know their own strength in the body for sure. What's that about, right? Well, very often they'll just say, that's not us. That's the patterning of the lineage that got connected to the biology, right? If we clear out that patterning, then all of a sudden we feel more comfortable in our bodies. And one of the other questions I asked is, I was like, we look at you guys and we think something's wrong with you. It's like you can't function in a body. Something's wrong with you. And the kids often said, how many do you think within the neurotypical realm are integrated? How many do you think are completely connected to their bodies, completely interfaced, know their wholeness? And when they said know their wholeness, I thought, oh gosh, there's not very many of us that know that. There's not very many human beings that would, if you ask them, are you whole? Do you feel whole? No, we have emotional patterning and mental patterning. So they said, what if we're just a mirror or a reflection of where the collective consciousness is at this time? And as that starts to get regulated within each one of you, then we can show you a different reflection. So Once I started doing that kind of work where integration includes the whole family, not just the child, that's where we saw a pretty huge shift.
Now, two threads I want to pick up on. One is you talked about this very open right brain. So along with our left brain analytical functioning, there could be this very, very open right brain, which would allow more information and sensitivity and even sometimes perhaps a sense of being flooded with experience. And I wonder sort of how you see that. Some people talk about the brain as a filtering mechanism. And do you see that from working with children on the spectrum versus neurotypical people, there's a different kind of filtering happening, not as much filtering, or how do you see it?
I suspect that it's not so much the filtering system, but how much information is attempting to be filtered. So, if that right hemisphere is just wide open and you have access to all kinds of realms and realities that, subtle experiences that most people don't have access to, you just have that much more volume of information that you're trying to filter through the rational mind. And the rational mind likes things to be rational. It likes things to be understood. And so I think that there's a little bit of there's a little incoherence between one, what's trying to be processed, the volume of information that's trying to be processed, and the mechanism that's trying to do that processing. So I think that combination of all of those is pretty challenging. And when I am dysregulating, because the other thing that I know through my own, you might say, spiritual awakening at the hands of Riley and so many of these kids that have come after, and also talking to all kinds of other people who have had massive like kundalini awakenings or who have had, spiritual experiences through plant medicine or something like that. We have these big influxes of energy, but very often there's no place to put that new information, right? I know in my own experience, after I met Riley and I kind of went from pediatric speech language pathologist to, multidimensional communicator and seer and all this other, whatever you want to call that. The minute that happened, my physical nervous system in my physical body did not have the capacity to hold that new voltage, you might say. So that was like a 2-year process of putting that nervous system and supporting that nervous system so it could hold more information. And I've talked to so many people over the years too, Tami, that have had like massive kundalini awakenings or they've had these experiences and they'll say the same thing. If we took the volume of information that these kids have access to, because that right hemisphere is so more expansive than most of ours, we would all be dysregulated too. Yeah, I think we have to put it in context. And I know I can't even imagine in their case because they have this information coming in 24/7. Most of us have a big blowout experience and then we integrate it and then we can kind of re-regulate in our bodies again. But they have this information kind of coming in.
What helped you upgrade your nervous system capacity, and what can you share with us for people who are in a process where they sense that their nervous system can't quite handle all the inputs?
That's an interesting question because when it happened, that was probably 2000 that happened. When it happened after the fact, and quite honestly, at that time, I didn't have a whole lot of resources around that. So I kind of had to figure it out. So at first it was just literally downtime. It was just, I had to go into some way of just relaxing myself. Yep. So I had to leave my family for a while. I had time at a house on the beach. Literally, I was just trying to regulate that way. What you become very well aware of as you're trying to regulate is there's certain foods or there's certain experiences that are just too much. Bright lights were too much. Anything that was a stimulant was too much. You might think you want to have a glass of wine to kind of forget about the experience, but that's a stimulant in this case. And so you figure out very quickly that's making it worse instead of better. The other thing is some of that emotional body processing that I just hadn't been able to look at up until that time. And that, quite frankly, was about the time that, maybe not the presence process yet, but other ways of dealing with that came in. I did finally find people who could help me energetically. So I had different people that came into my life to help me, regulate, through energy work and things like that. So honestly, I think whatever works. And what I will say, especially for parents who have these kids in their home 24/7, because a dysregulated child is absolutely going to dysregulate a parent. None of us want to see our kids suffering. None of us want to see our kids doing things that make them stand out in an, negative light, right? And so, but that's why I'm saying it's like when we start really helping parents to regulate their nervous system, to have a breathing process or to have something where they can bring themselves back into the moment instead of just being triggered and activated in this way, that's also really supportive for the nervous system. Anything that helps balance the brain, that left and right hemisphere, can also be very regulating for the rest of the body.
I want to pick up on something else too. You mentioned how you were working telepathically with individual children who are on the spectrum, but then you started receiving messages from the collective consciousness, if you will, of this neurodivergent population. What? What do you mean? What?
Really, what? And so, yes. So it used to be that I would be with an individual child. I would, after Riley, these kids were finding me everywhere in the grocery store as well as, in my private practice. And so I already knew that I could make that connection with them because of Riley and because of a few of the other kids that came after. So what would happen is, I was talking to them, I was getting information. And once you start talking to a fair number of these kids or telepathically communicating with them, you're kind of going, okay, there's a pattern here, right? There's similar things that are being said. Once I kind of figured that out, all of a sudden, I literally would maybe be meditating in the morning, or sometimes I would just be driving my own 4 biological children, to school or whatever. And I would hear more this, I'm just going to call it like a collective voice. It wasn't, sometimes it would sound like multiple voices at the same time, which was any parent who's driven 4 kids in a car anywhere, you hear multiple voices in the background, right? Because as children are speaking to you and they're speaking over each other, it kind of sounded like that at first in the collective. And then it solidified over time into more like a singular voice that represented all of them. But at the very beginning, they would, like, I would have a thought going through my head as I was driving my children to school or wherever, gymnastics, whatever it was. I'd have a thought in my head and they would respond. And as they were responding, they're giving me all this information. But that was totally overwhelming to me. I couldn't be the mom of 4 little girls and hear their, verbal communication and interact with them, be present to them, and be present to all this information. So again, I had to structure that. So I said, okay, every morning after I get everybody to school, I'll sit down for an hour. You guys can tell me everything you want to tell me, share that information. And, sometimes that went into a file of yet to be understood, but I would just take the information in and then that's just how it came about. Now I can connect with the collective consciousness of a variety of groups. And it's just a skill set that seems to be available.
What do you mean a
point.
variety of groups?
I knew you were going to ask that question.
It left me like, what are we talking about?
So right now I run a group called the New World Portal community. The New World Portal community is not just parents of children diagnosed on the spectrum, although there are a lot of people there that are in that dynamic, but people who are really looking to integrate as much of themselves as they possibly can, like integrate our totality, right? So in that case, there's 100 people or so in this group. And as I'm connecting, they're basically telling me from that higher perspective what they would like to work on or what's possible to work with. And at first I was a little, I knew that it was possible because I was speaking with the collective consciousness of the children. And I've done this a million times in doing some type of energy work or supportive energy work for that collective. So when I was told that the New World Portal was going to come about, I assumed I could already connect. But it's always nice to have confirmation too. So very often what happens in that group is we're kind of looking at, this is the energetic climate right now. This is what's taking place. And this is the consciousness or the collective that's going to be interfacing with that. So what do you guys want? What do you guys need fed back to you as information so that you can be conscious of what's going on? And whatever comes out, it just flows through. But what happens all the time is people will email me right afterwards and they'll say, oh my gosh, you started talking about this or that or the other thing. Here's what I've been working on, and it's stuff I don't know anything about. So, they'll say, oh, you talked about the angelic realm in this last call. I've literally just been calling on that part of myself. Here's a picture of what that looks like. Oh, you just started talking about the Schumann resonance or what's going on. I've just started following this guy that's on YouTube or whatever and have been understanding what that's doing in my own body. So again, I tell them all the time, if there's any doubt that it's coming from their consciousness and what they're working with, then, just pay attention to why does it feel like that this is custom designed for them? And it is because they're designing it. Yeah.
The last point, Susie, that I'd love for you to talk about is, I think in some ways, you ready for this, perhaps the most far out of every point we've covered so far, which has to do with your conviction, if you will, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that these children that are being born at this time on the spectrum are embodying and have the potential with good integration to embody a new type of species, new capacities for human beings, that we're seeing a new human, if you will, in our time. So tell me what gives you that conviction, and then also what the qualities are of this new human.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt it is a conviction, and it's a conviction because, again, from the very beginning, I was establishing relationships with this group of souls. And don't tell me anything that's not true. It's like, so that's part of it, establishing that relationship. But the other side of it is that you've got, how do I want to say this? The conviction is there because you've got souls who are able, and we've watched this, we've demonstrated this, to express their skill set, regardless of whether they're verbal or nonverbal. The very fact that they don't have verbal communication, in many ways, made a lot of us lean in, right? It makes us lean in and be curious about who they are. The very fact that you've got more and more people right now who are becoming telepathic or are having these telepathic interfaces, experiences with these kids, or any number of other experiences, healing or reading minds or whatever you want to call that, is just demonstrating to us that we all have this capacity. We're just being we're being invited back to it through these souls being here, right? And so to me, it's like the conviction is that regardless of whether they're regulated or communicating or any of that, we as a humanity are all evolving in their midst. I wasn't telepathic, and then I was at the hands of a little 4-year-old kid. How does that happen? So the conviction is really around this whole awareness that they are that. They absolutely are that. What I'm beginning to speculate at this point is that now that we have humanity opened up through things like the telepathy tapes to this fact that they just are this, these capacities are there, it also makes me speculate that more and more children will be able to become more fully present and integrated with that physical body because the masses are much more open than they have ever been. These children that came in 30 years ago had a really rough go of it. Nobody knew about telepathy. Nobody really, if they did have those experiences, they hid those experiences because if you talk about that kind of thing, you're the crazy person. But now that, it's out there and people are having this conversation everywhere, what I'm noticing within my own clients is it's getting easier and easier for them to demonstrate those skills at a physical human level, regulate those skills through their physical human experience. And I think what we're looking at 5-10 years from now is many more of these kids that yes, I have that capacity and I'm able to be regulated with that capacity in my physical body. So we'll see what happens.
Suzy Miller, thank you so very, very much for bringing your voice and your love and enthusiasm here to our special series on spirituality and the neurodivergent mind. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tami.
And if you'd like to watch Insights at the Edge on video and participate in the after-show Q&A session with our guests, come join us on Sounds True 1, a new membership community featuring award-winning original shows, live classes, community learning, guided meditations, and more with the leading wisdom teachers of our time. Use promo code PODCAST to get your first month free. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. Sounds True, waking up the world. The Sounds True Podcast Network.